Hello. Now I'm going to show you the software architecture of the part of the code that you're going to implement in the first phase. Is a software architecture that is described in terms of software layers, different layers. I'm going to show you the responsibility of each one of the layers. Then I'm going to tell you which technology you need to learn or to apply. In some cases, you already know the technology in order to implement the code in each one of the layers. And finally, I will map the layers to the file and package structure in the code that we have provided so that you can start the project. So I will start with the lower layer, which is the data access layer. This the type of applications we are going to develop have persistent objects, so they store persistent objects. Okay, they are persistent, which means that if you run the application twice, when you run it the second time, the information from that was produced or a result from the execution of the first time still there, and you can change it. Okay, so to do that, you use the data access layer, basically to access objects that are stored in a database, load the objects to memory, and store them back. And this technology is supported with GPA database. Okay. Actually, we'll not need to know about the databases because this layer basically hides the structure of the database, and basically you can interact with the persistent from an object-oriented perspective. Okay. Although there are interfaces that allows a more detailed interaction with the database, but we are not going to use it. Okay. Then on top of this layer, you have the domain model layer, and the domain model layer is where you have what is called the business logic. So the rules. So when you say that a student should have at least one dashboard per curricular course the student is enrolled. Okay, it's a business rule, and basically it is implemented with the object-oriented paradigm, and that preserves the consistency of the objects. So the domain model layer is implemented in our case in Java and following an object-oriented approach. When you change the objects there, then you invoke the data access layer, or the data access layer is invoked. I will tell you where. And in this data access layer, that is invoked in order to store the objects in the database. On top of this is a service layer that works as a facade, that basically here you have fine-grained objects, and here you have a set of services that are offered to the outside applications, okay, that want to use or to change this domain layer. So it's in some way is a way to preserve the consistency of it, reducing the granularity, so encapsulating and defining more coarse-grained services, and so restrict the type of accesses you can do to the domain layer. Okay. Another property of this service layer is that it guarantees the transactional behavior. It means that by transactions, it means that when something executes here, when I execute a service through the service layer, at the end, either everything is changing the database or it aborts. So basically means that it provides atomicity into the access of the database. You need to realize that the application can be accessed by different people at the same time, and you may have some concurrency problems. So to implement it, we at the technology use again GPA because but in terms of transactions. Okay, so it preserves the transactional behavior in the accesses to the database. And what you do here actually is you are going to write and read objects from the database. It occurs here. Okay, so basically you load from the access layer to the domain layers through and write them back through what you invoke in the service layer. On top of this, you have a service test layer, which are the tests. So we're going to test our code, is our approach, and what we are going to test in this first part are set the services that are implemented here. You could have also implement at this level, but in this project we decided that we are going to only test this. Of course, when you test these services actually invoke the domain layer. We are also testing the domain layer, but the tests are written in a way that you test the service layer. Okay, and the technology you're going to use to implement the service test layer, you are the Spock tests. Okay, is Spock, the Spock framework. Finally, there are DTOs, which are data transfer objects, that are objects that are used by the service layer to send information outside the service layer. Why this is relevant? Well, the reason is that I told you that the goal of the service layer is to encapsulate and hide the domain layer. So if the top layers, and in the next step you'll see other layers on top of the service layer, if the top layers need information, you cannot send them with the structure of the domain layer. Why? Because then this structure will be, you will not encapsulate it, basically. Okay? So what happens is that the service layer transforms objects in this structure into data transfer objects, and in that way they encapsulate this structure. Okay? So this is the architecture. Now I'm going to show you how this map into the code. So in the data access layer you have the dashboard repository. So if you go to the code, we'll see here the project, and we'll see here Java, the tutor, and then you see the dashboard. So basically dashboard is a package that represents a sub-functionality, the functional dashboard. And inside dashboard you have a repository package and contains the dashboard repository. I will describe this later in more detail, but actually it provides this interface to the database, and this class is in this layer. Okay? Then you have the domain model layer, where you have a dashboard class. In this case, you can have more classes, and if you see there, you have the main there and the dashboard class there, so maps to that layer. Then you have the service layer. We have the dashboard services, okay, and it maps to basically dashboard service there. Okay, is that the entity? Of course, you can have more service classes, but I will describe these classes next. Okay, and finally you have the service test layer, where you have the test classes. Test classes are in a different structure, so are not in the Java main structure, but are in the source test structure. And here we'll find service. Okay, it represents the service test layer, and inside a particular test, which is the create dashboard test, the get dashboard test, that I will describe as well, and it's one of these classes. Okay, and finally the data transfer objects, we'll find it in this DTO package, and you have the dashboard DTO there, and it's there. So this is the architecture, and it is the main goals of each layer, how are they related with the structure in the code.